think it's one people die from lack of knowledge. They're not knowledgeable of what happens at the end of these great inflations. They're not knowledgeable of how to protect themselves. They're not knowledgeable about how easy it is to buy silver. I mean, silver and gold purchases are the easiest purchases to be made in most places in the world, not all.
I am delighted once again to be joined by a friend of GoldCore, the producer of the documentary Silver Sunrise, the author of the Morgan Report, the silver guru himself, Mr. David Morgan. David, welcome back.
Oh, Dave Russell, thank you so much. I'm happy to be back.
It's always good to have you. I always really enjoy our chats. I'm actually going to start with Silver Sunrise. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a work of passion. I mean, I've been contemplating doing like a fourth book. I've written three books, one on silver, primer, get the skinny on silver investing, then the Bible on silver, the Silver Manifesto, which went into almost all silver except the last chapter, which talks about beyond silver, which is a little bit of the impetus for this movie. And then the last one was Second Chance, written by myself and the late great David Smith, which was really an investing book. It talked a lot about the metals, but it talked a lot about investment strategies and not leaving too much on the table. And I've actually had people that said it's the best investment book they've ever read. Of course, that's personal opinion. I'm not saying it is, but it's nice to get that kind of
Mm.
feedback. So thinking about what to do next, someone kind of prodded me and said, "Why don't you do a film?" And I'm thinking, I don't know how to do it. And so one thing led to another, and things kind of fell into place. And I met this gentleman named James Yeager, who's made 10 films, mostly on the patriotic side of the equation, and got the Tully Award for the first one he did, which is called Fiat Empire. It's got some real notables like G. Edward Griffin and Ron Paul in it.
Wow.
And he said, "Well, okay, let's do Fiat Empire 2." And I said, "No, I don't really want to do much more of the story. Most people that follow our stuff are familiar with the money problem. I want a more of a take on a solution and what the spiritual aspects of this are." So that's the direction we went, since I'm, kind of the main producer of it. I'm going to read you the synopsis real quick. You might spark some questions, but if you look up what's the greatest fear of most people in the world, you'll find about 80%, at least the last time I did it, was like the money problem.
Mm.
So anyway, here's the synopsis of the film. Silver Sunrise delves into the stress, fear, and control that money exerts over our lives. Despite its essential role in society, many feel enslaved by money. Silver Sunrise explores the emotional and mental toll, questioning why money drives everything from love affairs and conflicts to the fall and rise of empires. Taking us on a trip down love and hate lane, Silver Sunrise traces the evolution of money from tribal sharing to gold and silver, from paper and debt to electrons and central bank digital currencies. Silver Sunrise sheds light on the manipulation of money by governments and banking cartels, hell bent on exploiting civilization with endless debt, perpetual wars, and unjust enrichment. To better understand the monetary system and how we are corrupted, Silver Sunrise enables one to postulate a new, brighter future, one without the overwhelming stress, fear, and control associated with money. So that's a big goal, and that's primarily what we focus on in this film. And really, one of the key ingredients is the adage that money makes the world go round. That's a fallacy.
Mm.
Energy makes the world go round. And without energy, nothing happens. So if you go into the idea of low price energy or 0 point energy or some of these things that have been talked about, and actually there's a film by Dr. Stephen Greer, The Lost Century, and in that documentary, which I think is his best, doesn't hit the UFO question very much. He really stresses these types of energy systems that have been suppressed, or people that made the inventions magically disappear. It's something to watch if you haven't. And so I bring that up in this film. And I think it's important because if we had abundant energy that costs nothing or next to nothing for the world, which is purportedly what Nikola Tesla was proposing way back, we'd have a whole different world. If
Mm.
you had unlimited energy, then the cost of desalting or desalinizing seawater into fresh water. You wouldn't care because you had abundant energy to do it. So you could make the Sahara a garden. You could do so much.
Mm, mm.
And so that's kind of the push on the film. And, of course, I've been at war with the system really metaphorically and in philosophical terms, meaning that, we, the people, should control the money. We should be able to do peer-to-peer transactions. Do we even need the bankers? And certainly we don't need the money powers to control our lives, which in my studied view has been the case in almost all societies for quite some time. So we want to break free from that. So said a mouthful. You might have a couple questions on that, but it should be out, I would think, the beginning of first quarter of 2025. And of course, I'll be asking, come back on your program after you've watched it and, critique it. Tell me you missed this. I wish you would have done this more. You left this part out. I like this part, whatever it is, because hopefully it may be one in a series and maybe a Netflix or something will pick it up. I don't know. That's my goal. My goal is to have a lot of people watch it. It should appeal to all, left, right, and center, because money affects us all. And that's my goal. And it's to get people to think, not agree with anything, just think about where money plays, what part it plays in our lives. And, do I have a say in it?
It sounds amazingly thought-provoking. I'm really looking forward to seeing it. One of the lines there that just stuck out for me in the synopsis that you're reading there was endless debt and perpetual wars.
Yeah.
Um, that's kind of where we find ourselves at this moment in time. National debt in the US, $36 trillion. That's just the on-balance sheet liabilities. And we look at off-balance sheet liabilities, you can probably throw in another 100 trillion onto that number at least. Endless wars. Well, we've got a war on the continent of Europe, but we've got hotspots across the globe at this moment in time. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of political will to kind of come to the table and bring these things to a conclusion. There's vested interests in perpetual wars. Is one of the things you talk about energy making the world go round. Well, energy is required to fuel the war machine also. Um, we're at a very precarious point in world history at this moment in time. We've just finished 2024 there, which saw massive rallies in the gold market, in particular, new all-time highs. Silver, it didn't make an all-time high, and it's actually still quite a bit off its all-time high. It's 50% below its all-time high, nominal high, that is. Why do you think it is that silver is still underperforming?
Very tough one. I mean, number one, it's education. I mean, if people really understood how valuable silver is in a technological society and that its true value is well above what it sells for now, I think we'd have more silver investors. Gold gets more of a mainstream treatment. I mean, central banks have been buying gold at a very high rate the last couple of years. I think the run to gold's showing it in the price movement. Silver's moved, but as you said, it's not, the gold silver ratio is really above 80,
Mhm.
which is showing you that silver is not performing relative to gold as someone like myself would expect. I think it's one people lack, die from lack of knowledge. They're not knowledgeable of what happens at the end of these great inflations. They're not knowledgeable of how to protect themselves. They're not knowledgeable about how easy it is to buy silver. I mean, silver and gold purchases are the easiest purchases to be made in most places in the world, not all. But if you want to buy a cryptocurrency, you got to give a bunch of IDs. You got to go to the exchange. You got to, give them a thumbprint. I'm exaggerating slightly, but there's a lot of centralization in the decentralized crypto world before you can buy it. With a gold or silver, in most jurisdictions, you can walk in with cash, be it euros, yen, or Canadian dollars, plunk it down on the counter and walk out with some gold coins, silver bars, or what have you. Very simple to do, or over the internet. You can just do it in some cases with a credit card or a debit card if you wish. So, but it's the money of all time. But I don't think people are educated. I think that's number one. And number two, it's buying pressure. I mean, how much buying pressure is there? And the retail market's kind of given up, at least momentarily, because silver at the $30 US range is kind of where it took 11 years to get back here. So a lot of people that are stale longs, people that bought it at 25 and paid a $3 premium, so it's 28, now it's 30, they can sell it for what they paid for it, maybe make a couple bucks. And they're just burnt out. It hasn't
Mm.
performed the way they wished. It hasn't met their expectations. They bought too much at the time. Their wife's on them. There's a lot of reasons. So the retail market really is more of a seller than a buyer. Conversely, the industrial side is buying because they have to at greater rates than they have in a long time. And the only part of the equation that's left out is the investment side on the professionals with investment funds, pension funds, retirement funds, those type of entities that will move into the market that happened in 2020. In 2020, 320 million ounces of silver were bought through the ETPs or ETFs, better known.
Mm.
And that was a spike. We've never seen that much demand for physical silver before. And since that time, most of it's been sold back out into the market. But I think that's the next leg up, is when there's a demand from industrial and professionals in the investment community that are big players that come in and, like Warren Buffett are buying 1,000-ounce bars like, a good investor would buy 100-ounce bars.
Sure. So what you're talking there is very much the industrial sector is the one that will actually kind of lead this.
Now, well, yes and no, not to argue with you, but
Mm.
the the industrial side's pretty much set at 60% of the market. That's not going to vary very much. Even with a recession or a depression, it will go down, but not significantly. But the swing vote is the investment demand.
Do you not
That's
put
where
do you not do you put much stake in the argument for say the electrification, the demand for silver for solar going on now for the next couple of years and eating into that silver deficit?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you took the investment side out of the equation and there was no investment demand, which of course isn't true, and there was only industrial demand, jewelry demand, and silverware demand, uh, in about theoretically in about 4 years, that alone would take up all the silver produced and recycled. But the investment demands the swing vote
Mm.
because when people look for a safe haven or gold's too costly or they want to buy back their silver that they sold at 30 and it's 35 and they think it's going to 100, there'll be a big vote that comes in that starts buying silver for investment purposes or protection or safe haven reasons again. And when that's on top of a steady industrial demand and the investment professionals come in to buy at the same time, you're going to have a real run to silver. So it's a very small market, as we both know, and it's demand driven. And if you have all three demands simultaneously, you're going to get in kind of a feeding frenzy, I think, because it is such a small market. If the investors start buying and stacking it, that's not available until it reaches a higher price. But industry has to have it regardless, and it's priced inelastic for them in most
Hmm.
cases. They have to have it or they're out of business. So whether silver's 50, 60, 70, 100, or 110 doesn't matter to them. They'll have to buy it. And the cost to them isn't the price per ounce, which obviously they have to pay that. It's how much goes into their end product.
Mm.
Even in a solar panel, the main cost of a solar panel is not the amount of silver in it. It's a very small part of the total cost.
Right. There was something that you touched on there a few minutes ago, and you said that people don't necessarily understand how these things behave in this kind of in inflationary environment. Recently, just towards the end of December, there we saw the Federal Reserve cutting rates, which surprised a lot of people, particularly because we've got stock markets at all-time highs. We've had gold, commodities, precious metals rather at all-time highs. We've got property prices at all-time highs. We've got cryptocurrencies at all-time highs. We've got inflation above the Federal Reserve's target in around the 3%, when they're meant to be targeting 2%. So, I mean, if you were looking at that from the outside, you would say there's absolutely no way that the Federal Reserve is cutting rates. And if anything, they're either keeping them on hold or potentially increasing them. They're cutting rates. Why are they cutting rates?
Well said, Dave. Well said. Why? Because the cost of money of servicing the national debt is very important to the bankers. And so if interest rates are lower, then the cost of servicing your credit card payment is less. And that's the only reason, really. But no one will say it. You and I will say it.
Mm.
But they want to get interest rates down so that they can keep the Ponzi scheme going a little longer.
And the reality is that we're probably not really looking at if you do look at your shopping each week, look at what you're paying for services, the inflation rate is probably well above that 3% anyway, and probably
Well, here in the
significantly
US,
so.
I mean, many, sorry if I interrupted,
That's
many
all
are
right.
saying about 30%. I
Wow.
mean, I do my own grocery shopping. I have for years. And just everything. It's just amazing. Eggs used to be a very, cheap, high protein, whatever. It was a very good value. And now, the cost of eggs is astronomical in a lot of places, and butter and you name it across the board. And even like, junk food, it used to be very affordable, the dollar menu, that's
Mm.
years ago. And just a drive-through window hamburger type of thing is like a $10 bill minimum.
Wow.
And not too long ago, it was $6 for a gourmet version of it. I mean, it's just really it's catching up. And 30% of a food budget. The thing that bothers me, and I'll say this and give back to you, it really annoys me in so many ways. But the number one inflation part that really annoys me is that they take out food and energy. The two things humans need most are fuel and energy, or excuse me, food and energy. And they're out of the equation. Are you kidding me? Couldn't be more in your face how bad they're screwing us with taking that two things out of the inflation index.
Yeah. Not only are the two things that we need, but they disproportionately affect lower income as well because a larger percentage of wages and lower income are spent on food and energy. So inflation in that area has a disproportionate impact on the lower waged. Um, just going back and you're talking about significantly higher numbers than the 3% inflation rate. The claim is that real GDP in the US is 3.6%. So real GDP being the nominal minus the inflation rate. If you're saying that the inflation rate is significantly higher than 3%, we're looking at negative GDP in the US.
Yeah, part of the GDP equation is basically the money flows. And when you're printing up the kazoo, then it's going to actually add to GDP, even though it's, non-productive. I mean, you take the people that are trading, stocks and commodities for a living, that doesn't add any productive capacity to the general physical economy,
Mm.
but it's a way to quote unquote make money. So there's a lot of things at the end of these great inflations where we see a lot of gambling take place. Look at the crypto market. I mean, Fart Coin has got some kind of astronomical
A
market
bill
cap.
$1 billion market cap.
I mean, this is insanity. I mean, if this doesn't show that we're close to the end of civilization as we know it, I don't know.
Um, yeah, so there's been a kind of concept that I've been trying to form in my mind that this is very much like it's like a silent financial crisis that we're going through at this moment in time, and that if we look at this through from a different angle, we are seeing higher stock prices, we're seeing higher property prices, we're seeing higher gold and silver prices, we're seeing higher cryptocurrency prices. This rather than being warranted through extra value in the stock market because the S&P is trading at about 25, a PE ratio of about 25. The dividend yield on it is sub 1%. That rather than this actually being warranted by good investment decisions, this is actually the decision has been made on the basis of getting out of fiat currency and getting into asset classes, and near enough any asset class. Now, the traditional ones being your stocks, but then you now see this clamoring for any asset classes, whether that is property or whether that is fart coin. I mean, this really is a signal that something is rotten in the state of Denmark, as I say, and that there's this kind of silent financial crisis unfolding. What do you say to that?
No, I agree with you totally. And it's either conscious or subconscious will to win because it's a financial survival instinct. People either know, again, consciously or at a subconscious level, that the money's turning to dust. And so what am I going to have to protect myself? And what's interesting about that is studying financial crises in the past. And if you look at the Weimar Republic, you go look at Zimbabwe or Argentina or many of these places that have had currency crises, you will find that the stock markets always go up
Mm.
and it protects you somewhat, but not as much as the metals. In the past, the metals have been really the only thing that kept at or above the true inflation rate.
Yeah.
Stock market was better than money in the bank, but did it protect you as well as the metals did? Is that going to be true next time? I don't know. But you can just to revivify what you said. I mean, if you're going to put your money in fart coin, I mean, at some level, you know it's a joke, but yet you know that a lot of other people are desperate. They don't have much money. They put $200 in fart coin and it's up 10 baggers or 100 baggers. I don't know what the percentage is. I don't follow it, but I understand it.
Mm.
If you go back to McKay's book, Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, you'll see the psychology behind these tulip bulb manias that take place and the reason for them and the greed that's involved and the I don't ever have to work again idea and all these things that conjugate into disregard for reality in a way. And yet the reality is that once you leave the casino, unless you bet everything on black and you cash out your fart coin, when you leave the casino, you're going to walk into a physical economy that was a lot different than when you entered the casino. And now you're going to have to deal with higher food prices, food items that aren't available anymore, gasoline that costs you more, and a job that's paying you less, even though you got a raise, because the inflation rate is so much higher than your 3% raise that you got to keep you even with inflation. So the lie starts to appear everywhere, and people start to understand the big lie that you can print wealth. You can't print wealth. You have to produce wealth. And
Mm.
that reality starts to shine through like it never has before. And that's when you can get into the panic mode.
And claiming that there's an inflation rate of 3%, it's it allows the Fed to effectively inflate away this debt that they have. It gives them a basis for doing that. Inflation at 3%. We can afford to lower interest rates um, on the face of it, but the reality is ultimately it's going to fuel inflation. They need to fuel inflation because they need to inflate away this debt because there's no other way for it to ever become effectively manageable again. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, in a debt-based monetary system, the debt has to expand or it collapses, as the late great Richard Russell would say, inflate or die.
Mm.
Because when you make a loan or you borrow money, the interest that has to be paid on that debt doesn't exist.
Mm.
And the only way for it to come into existence is for the money supply to increase and create more debt. And of course, when you pay debt, you're paying the debt off with debt.
Mm.
Every dollar in existence, every euro, every yen is brought into existence through borrowings, through a debt. It's a debt instrument. So the whole system is really corrupt from the top all the way down. And we got to get back on a solid basis. Does that mean precious metals? Could. I'm not an advocate that there's only one way to go and it's a gold standard and all that. I'm not that hardcore,
Mm.
but I do think we need to get back to reality. We have to get back to trust. And I think that the gold and silver are a bridge to trust because there's no problem with physical metal being trustworthy.
Just
Both
trust,
sides,
trust in what exactly? We've lost faith. We've lost trust in our money, lost
yeah,
trust in our politicians,
trust in
lost trust in
money,
our
trust in transactions, trust in commerce, trust throughout the board. I mean, money touches everything,
trust in
and so
central bankers.
yeah,
Was
trust in central
if there
bankers.
ever was any.
Yeah, yeah. So and that can be brought about without precious metals, at least in theory.
Mm.
But I think the transition will be the precious metal because we don't have any argument over an ounce of silver. Now we might argue over the value of it,
Mm.
and that's what happens on anything. You can
Mm.
argue on the value of a car. You go to a car dealer and he wants 35,000. You say, I don't think I'll pay that. I'll pay you 30. Will you accept it? He says yes, or he says no, or
Mm.
you haggle on to get it to 32 and you make a deal or whatever it is. And this could be the same thing with real money. I mean, I want, I don't know, 10 silver coins for a month's rent. And now I'll give you, whatever. So, I mean, money is money, money in quotation marks, fiat can be negotiable, and so can physical, honest money.
Mm. You made a point there a few minutes ago in relation to inflation and how stock markets behave in inflationary environments. You talked about Zimbabwe and the Weimar Republic and so on. I was doing a little bit of research there a few weeks ago for another podcast that I was on, and this specifically came up, and it was the idea of best performing stock market in whatever year it was. I can't remember, was it 20 or 21 or whatever it was, and it was Venezuela. You know,
Yeah.
and it was 600,000% or something
Yeah.
ridiculous, and that's because basically the bolivar became like confetti. It became
Well, it did.
absolutely
Yeah. I mean, just
worthless.
to add to that, I mean, it literally got into the gutters in the street and people
Yeah.
wouldn't pick
And then with that, and I can't remember exactly what the inflation rate was, 10,000% or whatever it was, and the stock market went up by 600,000%. But the gold in terms of Venezuelan bolivar went up by something ridiculous like 90 million%. Right.
it. Yeah.
So, and again, it's just that the currency becomes utterly, utterly, utterly worthless. And as you say, while in times of inflation and stock markets perform well,
Mhm.
precious metals tend to even outperform the stock markets. So that's a kind of the real lived example of that from the not too recent or not too distant past. Um, it talked as well about we were chatting beforehand. There was a story there a few weeks ago about Michael Saylor, MicroStrategy, and his evil genius plan. And his evil genius plan involved the US selling all their gold and buying Bitcoin. Um, Now, his evil genius plan, he said the quiet bit out loud, and he said that it would be a wonderful thing for the US to do, and it effectively what it would do is it would mean that every other currency in the world would actually have to basically convert to the dollar, and that it would be a wonderful way for the US to be able to access 75% of the capital asset of its enemy. So it was a real case of saying the quiet part out loud, I think. Um, the idea of the US selling all of their gold and buying Bitcoin. What do you think of that?
Well, I think he's wrong. Let's look at some examples. Canada sold all of its gold. Now they didn't buy Bitcoin, but they sold all of its gold. Did it ruin the gold market? No. England, under Gordon Brown, the genius that he was, sold all of their gold or a lot of their gold at the
Yeah.
bottom.
Brown's
Did it
bottom.
stop the gold market? No, it's up tenfold from the time he sold in the US dollar terms.
Mhm.
It's up even higher in British pound terms. So I don't think selling all the gold would do much at all. But he claimed, if I heard him right, that it would ruin the gold market. It'd make all the other gold worthless, which I think is preposterous. And then Bitcoin would rule. Bitcoin it's an Excel file on the web. I mean, it's really not that big a deal. And the problem I have with Bitcoin are a couple fold. Number one, it isn't digital gold. Gold is on the periodic table. When Bitcoin shows up on the periodic table, give me a phone call, okay? The other thing is that if you read the white paper, and I was pretty much in line with the white paper, I still am philosophical, and I was a peer-to-peer outside the banking system payment. But it got corrupted when it went from the big block to the small block. And the small blockers really took over and hijacked Bitcoin. You listen to Roger Ver, who's very smart. I really like him. I looked to meet him sometime. But regardless, he points this out. And so, really, it's more from its philosophical, libertarian, free market, man has control over his own destiny type of money into a hijacked, run by the whales, run by Wall Street, ETFs, leverage the hell out of it, move it up and down, and do to it like you have almost any other monetary instrument. So it's lost its luster, in my view, quite substantial. And as far as being anonymous, give me a break. I mean, when the pipeline thing happened in the US several years ago and they were requiring Bitcoin as payment It was traced, it was tracked, and
Mm.
almost all of them can be. There are ways to do it anonymously, but it's not something that most people are willing to put the effort in to do so. So I'm not a big Bitcoiner. I do not like the fact of how much energy it takes to mine one. I mean, right now, Marathon and Riot, the two biggest miners in the US, basically mine a Bitcoin for 100,000. So there's not much profit in them mining Bitcoin, and they're really diluting the hell out of their shareholders to keep this thing going. And it's really sad if you look at the true equation, which means, when you vertically integrate a company, it's from the very beginning to end, you control all aspects of production. If you look at Bitcoin from that perspective, what you find is these miners are basically on the edge of going out of business. And so that's something that I think any long-term thinker should take a hard look at. And the other thing is liquidity. I mean, if can't be used for what it was purportedly started as a peer-to-peer payment system. If you go into Starbucks and sell your Bitcoin and it takes 7 minutes for the transaction to take hold, and I don't know what it is, $10 to make the transaction. I mean, the barista is going to have you very cold coffee by the time the transaction. So it's a store of value. Well, gold's a store of value. I mean, but gold is also a payment system at the same time. And if all you can do is hold on and watch the asset class go up, well, that's well and good. I'm free market. If you want to blow your brains out on Bitcoin, be my guest. I'm not going to do it. But I do think people need to think a little bit beyond the you don't understand Bitcoin or have fun being poor. I mean, these are metaphors for people that really are not balanced in my strong view. I mean, nature preaches balance, having all Bitcoin in your portfolio isn't very balanced. And having Bitcoin become the save all, be all, know all, do all for the United States government would really be kind of a poetic justice in a way, because it would be going from something for nothing, which is how the system's set up now. You digitize a dollar on a computer at the Federal Reserve and put it through the member banks of the Fed that sell out these securities. Now you move from something that at least has a paper representation at times into something that's just a string of digits and numerics, alphanumerics rather, on a blockchain that is the ultimate fiction in a way that is the whole basis of your physical economy? I don't think so.
Well said. Well said. Um, Two things I want to finish up with. First thing is, what does 2025 have in store for silver?
I think it's going to go sideways for a while, unfortunately, and I think it will start to leap up probably after the first quarter. I mean, we could get a bounce in the first 3 months, which is typical seasonality. So I don't want to leave that out. I think this time it may be different. I think we may just go sideways for a while and then start up.
Hmm.
I'm looking for a good year, not a great year, but it's always, I have to caveat with the black swan thing. I mean, if something really goes awry, the war escalates, this drone thing. I mean, there's so many potential black swans out there. And if anything happened that was significant, you could see a move into the metals, that would be, very, very strong and last and continue. But barring that, I think we're going to get a good year in gold and silver, but I don't think we'll outperform this year. I mean, we had what, a 30% move in gold and 30% move in silver. So 30% of 30 is a $9 move. So you'd have $40 silver. We might get to that level.
Hmm.
I don't think we get much above that, but the problem is technically once you get above 33 or so, there's no overhead resistance. So it could go from 33 to 50 pretty easily because there aren't any people with silver at that price that want to sell back.
Hmm.
So any new buying will push it higher and higher. So it's a tough call. I do think you should definitely hold what you have. And if you have enough, that's all you need to do. If
Hmm.
you're underweighted or you're looking to move out of an asset class that's overvalued, like everything else, the stock market, the property market, the commercial real estate market is falling, um, all these things, then definitely I would take some crypto profits and put it into real money. But that's just me.
What's the correct weighting percentage? I know it's going to be different for everybody, but
It
you know, what's a
varies
good
from
rule of
person
thumb?
to person. I mean, basically, the ultra wealthy, they use about 5%. The average middle class, which what's left of it, maybe 10%. But if you look at the math, if you look at Ibbotson and Associates, who did a study on portfolio analysis many years ago, was sponsored by my friend Nick Barashef from BMG Group in Canada. God bless the rest of his soul. It was 15%. And if you look at Jeff Christian, who some people admire and some don't, but Jeff's pretty damn good at what he does and straight up in many ways. He did analysis from 1968 forward, and in that time frame, it was 25%.
Hmm.
So if you look at the portfolio analysis, it's between 15 and 25%. I think 10% is sufficient for most people. And the ultra real wealthy, the Elon Musk, the Bezos, all that, I'd say almost all of them own gold. They just don't talk about it. But if you're a billionaire and you make 5 or 2.5 to 5% in gold, do the math. That's a lot of gold.
And finally, Silver Sunrise. Where can we find out more about it, and when is it coming out?
Yeah, we're done with all the interviews. Some we got almost everybody won. There were a few big names that didn't want to participate, even though we invited them. And anyway, all the filming's done, so it's on the editing floor now. It'll take a few more months. First quarter of 2025, I believe we'll have it. And you find more about it at silversunrise.tv. There's all kinds of trailers out there on that web page with Jeter Griffin, Vieira. Foster Gamble, who did the Thrive 1 and Thrive 2, uh, Edward Vieira, the best constitutional lawyer in the U.S., in my opinion, Mark Passio. I mean, all kinds of notables in the monetary sphere and influencers outside the monetary sphere. And I'm looking forward to the final product because I don't know what it looked like. I mean, I I'm not even privy to the whole interviews. I just
Right.
all
Okay.
I've seen really are the trailers, like everybody else. So it's quite a task, but it's a passion. It's a work of passion, as you know, and I'm grateful to have been in it, and I hope that it does, what I anticipate, and it wakes people up, shakes them up, gets them to rethink, and maybe take more control of their lives. I mean, basically, we could have a lot more control if we voted with our money a
Hmm.
little more consciously than we do. The problem is, in the end of the inflations, is maybe you want to eat organic or eat better or eat more, you know, consciously, but you can't afford to, and you have to buy packaged food or, high carb diet or whatever because your dollar doesn't stretch far enough to give you a really healthy diet. And that's very sad, in a way. I mean, going back to the movie Thrive, why do all the animals on the planet thrive and we at the top of the food chain don't?
Hmm.
Some of us do, but when you get these big disparities between 1% or the top tier and everybody else, they own 90% of the wealth and the rest of us own 10% of it or whatever the metrics are. That's when the French Revolution starts. Let them eat cake. Yeah, let them eat cake. I'm coming into your castle, letting you eat some cake. So we'll see. We'll see.
We're the only organism on the planet that has a cost of living. That might be something to do with it. SilverSunrise.tv. It's going to be out in 2025. 2025 is going to be a big year for you, David. It's been an absolute pleasure once again having a chat with you, and I really look forward to watching the movie and coming back and chatting to you about it. But for now, David Warren,
All right.
thanks for
Thank you very
being.
much.
Cheers.